Thank you everyone for joining us here this evening. If enthusiasm is reflected by numbers, this is by far the most successful event in our Things That Matter series. My name is Vivian Bromley, and I'm delighted to serve as the outreach coordinator on John Weston's campaign team. It's truly a great honor to share this evening with you and with two people I've come to admire, who are truly dedicated to the service and well-being of our nation and our people. In a moment, I'll be turning this over to John Weston, who will then introduce our very special guest. But in the meantime, we welcome your participation through your questions. Please write them in the question and answer section, which you will find at the bottom right-hand side of your computer screen. While this evening's episode is focused on leadership, you may also be interested in finding out how you can get involved in helping John Weston become the next Member of Parliament for our riding. Please visit his website at www.johnweston4, and that's the number 4, mp.ca to learn more how you can help. But first, let me give you a little bit of an inside story about John. He is someone that I have known for over 15 years, and I have worked with for over 7 years while he was MP. I saw firsthand his commitment to integrity, and in fact, in each of the offices he ran in our riding, hung a framed public statement of the values of our team: freedom, responsibility, equality, compassion, and integrity. John always flew economy on his numerous trips back and forth between Ottawa and the riding. He cares about accountability, especially as someone in government using taxpayers' money. If you want to help John win a seat in Parliament once again, please keep your eyes on his website. Again, that's johnweston4mp.ca. Also, there are 3 other things that you can do to help John in his campaign. First, help us get the word out. We're hoping that each person on this call and event tonight will tell 10 people about John's campaign. Number 2, please volunteer. Very important. And third, please donate. You are able to donate up to $16.50 in the calendar year. Tax credits make your contribution very effective. For instance, if you donate $550, you will get back $375 in a tax credit. And every dollar helps us. So thank you again for joining us tonight and for caring enough about our community and our country to participate. Now, over to you, John.
Well, thanks, Vivian. I really appreciate your intro. And I think you mentioned the word team about 3 times. That's my favorite word in your remarks. I love the saying, there's no I in team. We've got a great bunch of people who are working together in this campaign. And folks, you know, when we envisioned this series, we were trying to think during the pandemic, what can we do to bring people together, to get us out of our isolation, to create a forum where we could exchange ideas, where we could bring some of the top thinkers in the country together and equip me, if I am honored to be your next MP, with a great team of people who will make sure that I have excellent expertise when I go into the House of Commons. So the goal of this series is to provide that sense of camaraderie, exchange views, and provide an upbeat forum. Well, tonight's event brings all of those themes together. So thank you again, audience members, for showing up in the largest numbers ever in our series. Thanks to the campaign team for producing it. And of course, a big thanks to our very special guest, Erin O'Toole. Erin is a hardworking, honest, and accomplished man. He's earning the trust of Canadians in his resolve to serve as our next Prime Minister. Here in BC, I supported him in the leadership contest for several reasons. Firstly, he really gets what makes us tick in our region. He knows the importance of a solid environmental plan. And when I thought about running again for the Conservative Party, he heard me when I said, unless we had a great environmental plan, I wouldn't represent our party. And I'm so proud that he gets that part. And we'll talk about it later this evening, but the environmental part of the Conservative Party platform is achievable and it's practical, it's ambitious. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. Secondly, Erin, you represent a dramatic change in direction that our country desperately needs right now. With your career in the Royal Canadian Air Force, years of work as a lawyer, and as the founder of a charity that supports veterans, you know something about personal discipline. You know a lot about accountability, and you understand that vision means more than expediency, more than catering to what some politicians think the voters want today. For many people in our audience, this will be the first time to meet you, and for you, Erin, to meet them. Had the Trudeau government not fumbled the supply of vaccines to Canada, we might have been able to do this in person. Anyway, I'm grateful for your being here. I'm especially grateful for the timing, because this month I was nominated by our party to run for Member of Parliament in the next federal election. And let me just take a second to say why I'm doing this again, having previously served as MP for our riding, West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country. By the way, longest name still in the House of Commons, and I think the most poetic. I was in the House for some 7 years, and those of you who work with me, and many of you are on the line tonight, well, you know I'm a proud Canadian with an immense reservoir of hope for our future. But we know that our democracy needs protecting. We have to be ready to stand up and fight for freedom, democracy, and the rule of law, both at home and abroad. During this pandemic, we've all realized that in addition to the democratic health of our country, physical, mental, and spiritual health is also of paramount importance. So that's why I launched the Canadian Health and Fitness Institute, which is committed to make Canada the fittest nation on earth by 2030. And Erin, it's really encouraging to the people of our community that you've endorsed that goal. The pandemic has clearly shown the importance for Canadians to prepare for the unexpected in that health realm. We have to look beyond the virus to promote physical activity, reverse negative trends on cardiovascular health, diabetes, and mental illness. Having worked hard with people of our riding on matters of drug addiction and recovery, I was really inspired to see that the Conservative Party considers tackling mental illness as a key part of our newly announced campaign plan. People who know me understand I focus on the positive outcomes of any endeavor in public or private life. And Erin, I loved your remarks at the Conservative Convention, and I'm going to quote you. You said, "We must present new ideas, not make the same arguments, hoping that maybe this time more Canadians will come around to our position. We're never going to win over Canadians just by relying on Justin Trudeau to continue to disappoint." And you summed it up by saying, "His scandals, as outrageous as they often are, will never be enough to defeat him." So I'm with you completely. And I tell you that many people in our audience feel the same way. We support a plan, a positive plan, in this case, a plan to secure our future by focusing on jobs, accountability, physical and mental health, stockpiling essential medical products, and balancing the budget over the next decade. So I don't mind repeating that I wouldn't be doing this unless you as leader had clearly committed to an achievable, comprehensive environment plan to reduce emissions, protect our future, and create great jobs for Canadians. I really despair the path taken by Prime Minister Trudeau and the Liberals. He's completely mismanaged the handling of the pandemic, damaging our economy, costing jobs, and destroying Canadians' sense of hope. So tonight's webinar is a highlight. It's a highlight of this Things That Matter series. It's so great you're here. Anyway, you know what we're trying to do with this series, Erin. We've had episodes on national health, the environment, national security, and foreign affairs. And by the way, people, if you missed those and you'd like to see them, the previous episodes can be seen on the website. Well, tonight we have the biggest and best audience ever. I can't acknowledge all the dignitaries and friends as I'd like to do, but I do want to personally greet Les Jickling, my running mate next door in North Vancouver. Thank you, Les, for your commitment. And thanks to everyone in the audience who are active in building a better Canada. with a special thanks to those who are involved in campaigns like ours. So now for our special guest. Erin has worked all over Canada. He's enrolled in the RCAF when he was only 18, and he did his basic training here in BC at Chilliwack. He earned his wings in Winnipeg and served out of Halifax. Participating in search and rescue missions on Sea King choppers, he spent a dozen years in Canada's military before joining the private sector. As a lawyer myself, I'm proud to describe him as a fellow member of my profession. He's also a founding member of the True Patriot Love Foundation, a charity that serves veterans and military families across Canada. He's been elected 3 times for Durham, just east of Toronto, and I saw him firsthand as Minister of Veterans Affairs perform spectacular work in turning around a department that was really demoralized at the time. As someone who lived and worked in Taiwan and China for a decade, I'm really impressed by your grasp of Pacific Rim affairs and the leadership you've shown in launching that parliamentary committee on Canada's relationship with China. After serving as Conservative Shadow Minister of Foreign Affairs for 2 years, Erin is now the leader of Canada's Conservatives. He's a solid family man, married to Rebecca, and he's got 2 young kids, Molly and Jack. So Erin, I want to thank you for joining the hundreds of people who've come together to hear you today for this discussion of leadership. We look forward to this evening's insights and maybe a little bit of an appetizer on what it's going to be like with you as Prime Minister, bringing back a stable, accountable, focused government in Ottawa. Erin, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, John, and thank you, Vivian. It's great to be back with you in West Van, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky country. A long name, but a beautiful riding. You were always proud to say it. And you know, John, how much I've enjoyed my time in your ridings. We've done a few events at that magnificent library in West Van. And one of the times, a woman who had gone to school with my late mother came and brought photos of my mom, who I lost when I was young. So what a special moment for me. We've been to that pie factory, but my greatest memory, I've been to Quest, like you've got such a spectacular riding, but my best memory is one of my top Canadian memories. I was at Cyprus the day Alexandra Bilodeau won the first gold medal on home soil at the Vancouver Olympics. I was a few rows back from his brother Frederick, who had a disability, who he dedicated his gold to. Wow, British Columbia made the country and the world proud. I was there, my wife was working on the Olympics for CTV at the Broadcast Center. I was the lucky husband at Cyprus on a sunny, historic Canadian day. So you have a spectacular corner of this great country, John. And this is about leadership. And as leader of the party that founded Canada, and that I think has to get Canada back on track after the pandemic, I want a team of leaders. So that's why I was so glad to talk you into a little bit coming back into politics, because you are a leader. And when I think of John Weston, I think of your passion as MP for your community, for the environment, for small businesses, for BC as the Pacific Gateway. And you push that a lot. And of course, your incredible work on bringing profile to the connection between physical fitness and wellness and mental health and wellness. And I'll tell you, the shadow pandemic of this pandemic is the toll of mental health. It comes up in every discussion I have. So I want passionate team members like you to be part of that recovery, because as you said, we're putting a national mental health action plan as part of our 5-pillar recovery plan for Canada post-COVID. 1, jobs, 1 million jobs in a year, secure jobs. 2, secure accountability. Prime Minister with 3 ethical scandals, the We Charity, cover-ups, prorogation. The Canadian Armed Forces. As a veteran, I'm shocked to see the cover-up the Prime Minister was involved in for 3 years, his office, his minister, with respect to sexual misconduct allegations. These are important institutions and public trust is eroding, so we need to rebuild that. Secure accountability, secure mental health is our 3rd pillar. Secure our country, make sure we have domestic capacity and vaccines, make sure we're ready for a crisis. If we had the vaccines in January, February, John, I might be out there with you in the riding. If you look at the United States, President Biden just dropped the mask recommendation the other day because they're achieving the road to herd immunity. So it's been frustrating to see a G7 country so far behind. And the fifth pillar of our Canada Recovery Plan is securing our economy, getting the budget back into balance over the course of the next decade, helping people that need it during the pandemic, critical. And the Conservatives, we've done that. We've worked with the government, supported programs even when there were problems, and we worked afterwards to fix them. But we all know we can't burden our children with $500 billion of debt, with less opportunity. Mr. Trudeau's already spending away the future in planning to raise taxes on everything from home equity to income to small businesses again. So securing that economy, that 5-pillar Canada Recovery Plan, that's what we need. This is a great country. Our best years are ahead of us, but we need leadership. We need ethical and competent leadership after several years without that. And I'm glad this session's on leadership. I want to take questions. I want to hear what you'd like to hear, John, because I've been very proud to be part of teams, and I loved how Vivian started with teams. And if you're not smart as a team member, if you haven't followed and achieved objectives as part of a team, how can you lead? So you have a life full of accomplishment before public life. I can't say that about the current Liberal MP, who's known more for Twitter antics than anything substantive in the House. It's disappointing. We need leaders that bring skills to Parliament so that we can construct a government in the best interests of peace, order, and good government, good ethical government. Wouldn't that be great to see again? So a couple reflections on leadership, I'll say from my time in uniform, the private sector, the nonprofit sector. As a dad to 2 young kids, that's leadership too. In fact, I hear my 9-year-old running around upstairs. So hope mom will fill in there. But character is so critical to leadership. And I love the John Wooden quote, you judge the character of a person by how they conduct themselves when no one is looking. Let's look at that with respect to Prime Minister Trudeau. Within his first year as Prime Minister, he was taking private island holidays from someone lobbying the federal government. Not just him, his family, he brought the president of the Liberal Party with him on this private island holiday. SNC Lavalin, we remember Jody Wilson-Raybould from Vancouver, the first Indigenous female Attorney General in Canadian history, showing her ethics, asking the Prime Minister to stop his campaign to help SNC Lavalin remove themselves from a criminal investigation and charges. He fired her and then broke Ethics Commission laws again. The third time, of course, the WE scandal, even amidst a pandemic, lining up opportunities for friends and insiders. Most of the things I'm probably proudest of in Parliament or in my military time are things people don't know of because I did them for the right thing. And in fact, some of the success I had as Veterans Minister was due to winning the trust of people who had lost their trust with the government. We settled the Equitas lawsuit in British Columbia, brought by veterans against our government because they'd lost faith. I restored that faith. We improved programs, and they stopped their lawsuit for a time. And Mr. Trudeau forced them back into court when he won. So I want to build character. I want to build a team that restores trust in our institutions in our country, because we need to draw talented people like you, John, into public life, because Canada's best days are ahead of us, like I said, but we need to seize the moment. This is a competitive world. We can't run on fumes. Mr. Trudeau has already squandered the balanced budget and the strong economy he had. He has doubled the national debt, and his projections show that he's rounding second, headed for third. I won't leave that on the shoulders of my children. And I think all of us have to commit to being responsible, being inclusive, having a great plan for the future of our country. And that's what I'd love to talk about tonight. But if you want to start off by talking about the environment, because you were always a great advocate in caucus, I'm happy to walk us through the plan if that's how you'd like to start.
Well, it's hard to say where to start. The questions are truly pouring in, but let's go with the environment. You know, one of the things that the community insisted I work on related to abandoned vessels. We had a problem in British Columbia, and people of Squamish, people of Sunshine Coast, they saw basically littering the oceans with these things. So happily, together, the community and I worked, and we actually drafted a bill that got passed by the subsequent government. So that's one thing that we've worked on, working to make sure that the Department of Fisheries Research Lab is strong in West Vancouver and those things. But this specific thing that Patsy is asking that relates to our campaign platform, I think is going to be interesting to everybody, Erin. She asks, can you explain the environment plan on the personal low carbon savings account? I'm intrigued by this, and I'd love to hear you elaborate on it.
Absolutely. I'm glad, because we spent a lot of time to get a smart climate change plan right. Because I'll be honest, as a leader, I'm straight with Canadians. This is one area I think Canadians didn't think we did enough in the last 2 elections. And we had plans, but they didn't connect with people and their need to show that we've got a serious plan to get our emissions down, tackle climate change, and meet our international commitment. So it was important for me as a father, as someone who did environmental work as a lawyer and as a volunteer on conservation, to get this right. We are pricing carbon, but not with a tax to Ottawa. And people have a hard time understanding that. What do you mean you're pricing carbon, but there's no carbon tax? That's because big government has instilled into you that only they can make purchase or spending or distribution decisions with your money. We're turning that on its head, and for a few reasons. So Patsy, our pricing of carbon at the consumer level will be 1/3 the price Mr. Trudeau is using, maybe even a larger difference because he keeps changing his plan. And instead of sending that cost, your price at the pump, for example, to Ottawa, it goes into your low carbon savings account. You may have a savings in a checking account now. You would have a low carbon savings account. And then you make purchase decision with the amount that accumulates in the account. The only caveat is that those future decisions have to have a green, a sort of net approach or low carbon purchase intention. So there are some limitations to it, but it is about making sure that there's full transparency. You will see what your carbon footprint is in terms of you purchasing hydrocarbons. You will then manage that. You don't transfer it to Ottawa where it will be redistributed, mixed around, probably never neutral to you as a consumer. And then your purchase decisions will further consumer demand for green products. So it will actually help accelerate free market and private sector development of lower carbon options, a less carbon intense marketplace. Could be everything from a efficient furnace for your home, an EV, anything with respect to saving on electricity. It could even be low carbon, eat local food. It could be donations to a conservation fund. It could be a bicycle. It could be anything that has a green purpose to it. Why are we doing it this way? Because everyone knows, including in BC, and I've talked to people that were involved with starting the carbon tax in British Columbia, government sometimes, bureaucracies cannot be trusted with what is essentially a large and growing revenue stream. We want to price carbon, but we want to keep the accountability and that control with the consumers. The great part of our plan, Patsy, is we've had it modeled by one of the best climate modeling firms in the country, a Vancouver-based agency, which combines our consumer low carbon savings account along with our large emitter program, our EV requirements by 2030, and a range of other smart policies that actually modeled meeting our Paris targets, actually being as efficient on emission reduction as Mr. Trudeau's current plan, but with vastly superior job and investment numbers. So it is pricing carbon, which is a step for the Conservatives after the last few elections. But I think it's bringing innovation at a time it's desperately needed.
Thank you for that. And that dovetails quite naturally to a question about natural gas. So it surprises me that natural gas has achieved such a high level of controversy in Canada. It's one of our biggest contributions to the clean natural resource sector, in my opinion. And by exporting it, that we are able to get coal-fired plants off the market in places like China. So we're making a contribution internationally to a cleaner environment, to lower GHGs. There is provision in the Conservative plan about natural gas and energy. Everybody in the audience would love to hear you elaborate on that.
Sure, absolutely. There's two things when you talk about natural gas, John. First, we're going to encourage the continued renewable aspects to natural gas. So the blending to natural gas quantities that right now BC is advancing quite strong phase-in approach to this. So we're going to adopt that as a measure domestically. That means allowing landfill sites or other methane sources and others to be blended into natural national natural gas sources, which over time means less intensity. The other part of the natural gas part of our climate plan and our energy plan is the shifting of emissions and carbon intensity that you referred to, John. To really tackle climate change on the global level, that was the intention of Paris. Did you know that about 2/3 of the global emission challenge is coal burning to generate electricity? And you know Asia even better than I do, John, from your business work. When Ontario, my province, ended its coal use for generation of electricity, it barely budged the needle on global coal burning that year because China, because Indonesia, because Vietnam were voraciously opening more generation capacity because they have tens of millions of people coming into middle class conditions. And there's always going to be energy demands. And we can't deprive other countries of the staples that we have. So shifting to a dramatically less carbon intense source of power to generate that electricity is smart policy. And Canadian natural gas is not only part of the ability to do that. Canadian natural gas is by far the best in the world from an environmental social governance model.
Hear, hear.
ESG. I like to call it, John, ESGI. Environmental social governance and indigenous participation. So that international work that Canadian natural gas, LNG, can do can actually have dramatically bigger impact on global emission reduction. But our renewable blending piece domestically means that our domestic sources will be less carbon intense over time as well.
And it's really exciting in the Squamish part of our riding to see some of the innovations that are happening there. There's a plant that you may know of, wood fiber LNG, that's been in the works for a long time. And you know, my perspective is that if we hold wood fiber LNG to the highest environmental standards, it will be a producer of great jobs and investment, and is worthy of support. So really glad to hear that this is front and center in the campaign plan for our party. This moves us quite naturally to questions about the economy, about the debt and the deficit. So Maciek and Eric have asked questions that sort of intertwine. We've seen small businesses that have been decimated under the pandemic. Debts are up, cash flows down, supply chains for products are severely disruptive, product costs are beginning to increase and will go even higher soon. So as small businesses face growing competition from digital competitors, what are we going to do as conservatives to get behind small businesses and get the economy going again?
Well, thanks, Matt Chuck. Thanks, Eric. And John, you were always a huge, huge champion. I remember in caucus for small business, for innovators. That's what we're going to be as a government, because lost to the Liberal government is the fact that 2/3 of Canadians work for or are part of the ownership structure of a small or medium-sized enterprise. So if we see a wave of insolvencies and problems after COVID, we're also then going to see prolonged unemployment in Canada. And how can we ever tackle some of the national deficit and debt challenges we have if we have a chronic period after people spend off their COVID savings? If we have failures, we will see prolonged unemployment that we cannot afford. So what we have to do is save small business, and that's going to be central to our Canada Recovery Plan. We have a plan to make sure that we have not just an extension of the business account and some of the programs. We're going to have targeted programs to help highly affected sectors like tourism, like hospitality, like some of the highly affected sectors that have been closed down due to health restrictions. So we've made a commitment of 1 million jobs created in 1 year based on securing the jobs at risk right now, but then also eliminating some of the high regulation, sort of anti-investment legislation of Mr. Trudeau. Prior to COVID-19, there was $160 billion over 4.5 years leave Canada because our country was seen as a place where investment could not realize a return at a reasonable period of time. We have to change that. We can keep our highest environmental mitigation standards, our highest duty to consult with Indigenous Canadians, but we also have to show that there can be certainty for capital and talent that wants to come to Canada. Unlike Mr. Trudeau, I've worked in the private sector. I'm not scared of the private sector. I don't demonize the private sector. We need to see a strong small business and private sector led recovery. And we're going to have more information on our recovery plan on the first pillar of jobs, but it will be focused on making sure SMEs survive and thrive.
So given that, Erin, let's look at the budget that was just introduced in the House. I was asked by our local press, what did I think? And I always try and find something positive to say, but this budget comes at a time when we have a debt of $1 trillion. This budget would move us to a place where we're spending $40 billion a year to service the debt by 2025. This budget brings us another $780 billion in deficits. I mean, I can't imagine the numbers here. And I think of my children, some of whom are on the line tonight. I think of future generations. And I just can't see something positive to say. I don't like being in this position of being the opposition who's always criticizing. But what can you say when, after just taking everything off the shelf, the government introduces a whole new childcare program that will cost billions? So I ask, what do we do about this budget? What are your thoughts about it?
Well, thanks, John. I'm like you. I'm an optimist, and sometimes I'm leader of the official opposition. I sound so negative in my job. So what about a couple of things? Well, at least it came after 2 years. I guess they didn't make us wait 3 years for a budget. It's the longest time in Canadian history. We're the only G7 country that hadn't produced a budget within the time of COVID. The provinces all did it. For some reason, the Trudeau government took a pass. Another nice thing, it was nice to see a budget delivered from a female finance minister. I have respect for Minister Freeland. I think it's a very risky, terrible budget. It's a big letdown considering it's a pandemic budget and there wasn't a budge on long-term care or some of the supports the The provinces were asking for it, yet at $101 billion of new money sprinkled around with sort of pre-election styled spending with zero impact on job creation or productivity. Even David Dodge, the famous deputy minister and Bank of Canada governor who served under the Liberals, was in the Globe and Mail criticizing the budget today. Nothing for jobs, nothing for productivity and spending risks. You highlighted the $40 billion in servicing the debt that Liberals are putting up. That's at historic low interest rates. The day after the budget, Governor Macklin of the Bank of Canada said that because of inflation, and the small business owners brought that up, we will see interest rates go up. The risks that this budget represents because of its unprecedented spending levels and no fiscal anchors of any sort. They're floating anchors that move. How many anchors on boats float around and move? There's nothing to lock it in and to provide security. So it's a big fail. So we're gonna be putting out some contrast. I want, as opposition leader, not just to oppose, but to propose. So the 5-point Canada Recovery Plan that I launched at our convention was the starting point of a series of policy documents we're doing, John. The climate change was quite well received. We had a lot of environmental groups offering a lot of praise, quite frankly. A lot of people were surprised. I'm getting a little surprised even within our own movement. But I said, we're going to have a clear and serious climate change policy that I think is more innovative, more effective than Justin Trudeau. I will deliver. I will not just make promises like Trudeau does. And wait for some of our stuff on jobs in the economy. I think people will see the Conservatives got us out of the last global recession. You were there, John. You know we did it faster than any other G7 country. We will do it again.
One of the biggest things that concerns people is their nest egg, their home, their principal residence. In this discussion of budgets, do you want to just comment on retaining the capital gains exemption on principal residences? Is this something that you would be committed to as leader of the Conservative Party?
Absolutely. We will fight tooth and nail against the Liberal plan to encroach on that home equity. A lot of Canadians have seen the slow burn approach of the Liberals on this. So they've started saying that's not their plan at all. They are planning to have massive tax increases if they win another election. They have to with this crazy budget because interest rates will only go up. The bond rating agencies are already giving them warnings. And so they will put healthcare and old age security at risk. The Globe and Mail editorial today basically said just that. So what are they planning? Well, in the last few years, they have had CRA track home values. They have CMHC, a Crown controlled agency, running a study on the taxation of home equity, removing the capital gains exemption for primary residents. And several of their activists and elected MPs, including the parliamentary secretary for housing, have said they want to do this. So I'm not making this up. They have various agencies of the federal government looking at this right now. And some fiscal observers think that their lack of concern for their spending and for the debt is an indication that they have a major tax plan. So there's a few things they could do. There's thinking that they're going to tax capital gains more broadly, including on homes. They could be raising and creating new income brackets. There's a whole range of things that they will do. That's why our plan gets our budget back into balance over the course of a decade so that we can avoid these tax increases that are on the Liberal radar.
Thank you for that. Erin, several questions have come in about a key economic sector of this riding, one that really propels the whole province of British Columbia. You probably know what I'm talking about, tourism. So hard to be promoting tourism when we're closing down borders and restricting travel. Do you have any thoughts about what can be done to support the tourism sector? I'm thinking of the Whistler Pemberton part of our riding. Well, really every part of our riding benefits from tourism, as does the whole province. What are your thoughts about that? And it's so tough now as we're still in the pandemic, of course.
Well, any riding with sea to sky country in its name is going to draw a lot of tourists, and you would promote that regularly.
So we hope.
Now, this is one of the highly affected sectors that I said we're going to be addressing with substantive policy on our Canada Recovery Plan. In fact, we were supportive of assistance through loans to the airlines last fall. And the fact that Mr. Trudeau waited months, he's slow and incompetent literally with everything they touch, led to more layoffs, more uncertainty, more families hanging on by a thread. We had said last fall, shortly after I was elected, that we needed certainty, we needed those bedrock. We just wanted provisions on regional routes, jobs, and a fair approach to consumer refunds. The airlines were on board in October. So why again, the Liberals, they were the only major country, I think maybe the only G7 that hadn't had a specific loan or assistance package to maintain those critical services in a country through a crisis. The tourism piece, we're going to have support for small operators as well, and hopefully some plans to actually encourage some of the spending domestically that will build up in some of the savings that some groups of Canadians have accumulated because of lack of work disruption and lack of ability to spend. Other Canadians in this pandemic are really hurting. Some have accumulated savings. So can we incentivize that in a positive way? But here's something critical, John, that most of the national observers have missed, and too many people are giving Mr. Trudeau a pass on. One of his early doorstep press conferences last spring, where he suppressed Parliament. At first, they tried to pass a law to have unlimited taxing and spending authority for 2 years without having Parliament. Whoa, like that is almost like a dictatorship grab in the time of a crisis. We stopped that, but still Parliament was suppressed, and Trudeau promised a national testing and screening process and contact tracing. He didn't deliver any of that. In fact, my sister, who teaches in England and has 3 boys, they take 2 rapid tests per week in their own home. That's like 8 tests in their own home between them, because they had a national rollout of rapid screening and testing. We are going to need that for a safe and effective, swift reopening, because with variants and a whole range of things, we can have a faster reopening if we can provide certainty when people move that they're not COVID positive, and workplaces will be safer if an exposure can be tested through rapid testing over the span of several days. Trudeau has done nothing on this. So we brought a debate again to Parliament today on this very issue. We brought it in September, and until myself and Michelle Rempel-Garner started asking Trudeau questions, we didn't even have tests approved in Canada. And these are diagnostic tests. They're not cancer drugs. So the federal government has really dropped the ball here. The private sector agrees. They want these in place so that we can have a reopening of the economy in a data-driven and safe way. So you're going to hear us pushing more on the rapid testing. That will allow as quick of a return to tourism as possible.
Well, and thank you. You've anticipated questions that have been raised by Andrew, Sylvia, Patricia, Christopher, and others around the vaccine. One person asked, this is personal, you're allowed to duck this. Have you been vaccinated? Another person said, why has it taken so long to deliver vaccines? When I looked recently, we were 47th in the world in terms of vaccinations on a per capita basis. We've caught up a little bit, but can you just elaborate? You talked about the rapid testing, which is critical and something that we should be able to do. We're good at this stuff in Canada. We're innovators, we're scientists, We work well together. We're communities that support one another. Why can't we get the rapid testing thing done? But what about just the delivery part? And then that personal question, you don't have to answer if you don't want to.
No, I'm happy to. I've been very public with my situation. It's not typical, but my wife Rebecca and I got vaccinated our first dose last weekend. We put it on social media and talked about it with the media. We had AstraZeneca at a drive-through clinic run by our family doctor. There were 400 doses in Ontario, rare commodity, and it was first come, first serve for this health group that several family physicians run. And it was great. The physicians, the pharmacists, and their kids were running this in a church parking lot. Rebecca and I went and did it. We also both had COVID in September, and I was a brand new leader. My first speech in COVID, 1:30 in the morning to an empty room. My first tour to Quebec to meet the Premier Legault. On my way back, I caught COVID, brought it home. My wife got it. Thank goodness my kids didn't. So there's some that say, my antibodies that I would have in some level from battling COVID, the first vaccine is for me almost like a second maybe, but I will get my second dose in 4 months. The only country with the 4-month delay, and the only reason the delay is there is because Mr. Trudeau failed to deliver. When a historian looks back to this crisis and writes on it, because we can't get any questions and the Liberals prorogue Parliament, close it down rather than answer questions, I think one of the biggest failures of a Canadian Prime Minister in our history will be Mr. Trudeau's decision to try and partner with a Chinese state communist-controlled company, CanSino, for a vaccine for Canadians in the COVID crisis. They've not given any rationale for why they would have gone that route. And of course, that fell apart after several weeks. The Trudeau government was still telling people they were going to manufacture a vaccine with CanSino in Canada for several months after they knew the deal had fallen apart. Remember, that country at the moment is detaining the two Michaels. Their human rights and other records are atrocious. Mr. Trudeau had also been fighting with the pharmaceutical industry for 3 years over patented medicine pricing. And so there was a sense that some people feel Mr. Trudeau wanted to go around the pharmaceutical players that he'd been fighting with and try and do an end run with China. It failed miserably, and we're paying the price. They won't release their contracts. They tried to force an election when we've asked questions about the handling of this. So I think I'm disappointed. Today we asked for a push for Canada to ask for some of the US vaccines that are in storage. President Biden spoke last night about their arsenal of vaccines that they're going to deploy to other countries. Let's get Canada, their trade and domestic security partner, their ally, their neighbor. Let's get some of that supply and let's get people vaccinated early by the May long weekend, so that we can secure and save some of this summer.
Erin, thank you. And you mentioned the Chinese Communist Party. I want to come back to that in a second. We're going to launch a couple of polls while we speak. The polls deal with whether you live in the riding and how you may be leaning, just to give us some insight. So please go ahead with that. We had two really interesting discussions, Erin. One on national security and one recently with Michael Chong and Jonathan Manthorpe on democracy, China, Taiwan. And I've already commented how much I admire that you, who have not spent time necessarily working in Asia, seem to have an instinctual understanding of the priorities there. And you launched a committee in Parliament to review the China-Canada relationship, long overdue. Several people on the call, Shahab, Pixing, Meru, David, have raised these intertwined questions. One is, how do we make sure that our Chinese-Canadian friends and fellow citizens know that the focus isn't on people of Chinese background, it's on the Chinese Communist Party. That's where, at least I'm not going to speak for you, but where I feel there's a threat to our liberties, not only abroad, and you mentioned the two Michaels, but also here in Canada. So what can we do to deal with the intrusions of foreign countries? The Iranian regime also comes to mind. I served as a Canadian government liaison to people of Persian background for 7 years when I was a member of parliament, and I saw the concerns people had. So do you have any thoughts about dealing with those issues?
Yeah, great question, John. And you bring great experience to this, and will as an MP. We have to make sure that Canadians know that our issue is not with China, the Chinese people. The ancient and remarkable history of China is truly impressive, and it reverberates around the world. And Chinese Canadians are an incredible, important part of our country's success. Our issue is with ideology. It was the same issue we had with communist totalitarianism, really, under the Soviet Union. It wasn't the Russian people. It was an ideology that is based on suppressing liberty, suppressing truth, cruelty, deception. And in recent years, especially after the 19th People's Congress in 2017, the socialism with Chinese characteristics, as it's called there, has taken a very bad turn. And we've seen that with the Uyghurs and the genocide in Xinjiang. We've seen that in Hong Kong. We've seen that with crackdowns on religious practitioners, Falun Gong, Tibet. It has gotten worse. So we have to deal with China as it is in reality, not as it might seem in nostalgic notions that Justin Trudeau may have from his childhood. His statements early on saying he had admiration for China because the basic dictatorship gets things done quickly, like, wow. And he wasn't joking when he said that at a networking event. This is what we're dealing with. And Canada's run head smack into this. And we have to deal with China. It's one of the top two world powers, but we have to deal with it as it is. And we should work with our allies to restrain bad actions in both human rights, trade, international law, human rights. And that's what a conservative government will do, working very closely with our Five Eyes allies to try and rebalance trade, global discussion of human rights, and security. We're the only Five Eyes country that is still considering Huawei to be part of our 5G infrastructure. Mr. Trudeau approved purchases of security companies, defense companies that had Pentagon contracts to state-owned Chinese enterprises. This is why the Americans don't trust us as much in recent years. And it's been 3 different administrations now that Mr. Trudeau's been on the wrong side of, on Huawei, on cyber issues, on steel and aluminum transshipment. So we've got to get serious. And where's my background? You know, I didn't work in Asia or anything like that, but here's where my background's interesting, John. When I was at Procter & Gamble, I set up one of the first in the world intellectual property counterfeiting enforcement operations in Canada. Where did most of the counterfeit product come from? China. And my military time, of course, has watched the rise of the Blue Water Navy of China, the South China Sea Islands, where 70% of global trade goes through the South China Sea. And when they're constructing islands on little coral reefs, that should concern the world. Their interest in the Arctic. They call themselves a near Arctic state. That term didn't exist diplomatically until they started referring to themselves by it. So we have to deal with it in reality, and we should work very closely with the US to have our security, trade, and diplomatic options aligned.
Well, I'm really glad to hear you say those things. When I think about what motivates me in life, you know, I think of my dad, who was a POW in World War II, and I think of my kids, and I think, you know, to give away freedoms that were so hard won is really a crime, and we must not ever stand by and let that happen. So you've covered a lot of ground, and I'm going to apologize to many audience members because there's many questions we just haven't been able to get to on fisheries, on opioids, on aspects of entrepreneurialism. And so we're going to have you back, you know, and
In person,
as
in person.
in person, exactly. I'm just wondering if you could sum up your thoughts. I so appreciated what you said in your speech at the convention. It was really groundbreaking when you said we can't depend upon others to do badly. We have to do really well. Could you give us that sort of rousing sense? What is the vision? Why should people support Erin O'Toole and the Conservative Party? What's going to take us beyond the pandemic? What about leadership that is going to make not just us and our generation, but our kids rally?
Absolutely, John. And this is where leadership is needed, because what I said at our convention, you've quoted some of it. Thank you. The Conservative Party has to have the courage to change. And that is courageous leadership. Why? Because we also have to realize that because we lost in 2015 and 2019, Canada is worse off today. The atrocious vaccine rollout, the massive debt, the $100 billion of debt and higher taxes and flight of investment, that was all before COVID. So if we're in this to maintain Canada as the greatest country in the world, we owe it to ourselves to rise to the challenge, to change, to be the option that more Canadians will trust so that we can restore that tremendous potential. You have shown that when the people of West Van, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country see your ethical leadership and your party reflecting their hopes, fears, and aspirations for the country, they lent you your trust. They had a great advocate, and we did good things after the last global recession. We opened up trade markets. We now have to rise and meet the new challenges: climate change, Indigenous reconciliation, the opioid crisis. We need to make sure that we support issues like harm reduction, but we also have more mental health and wellness programming to help people avoid the trap of homelessness or opioid addiction, or get on their own path and journey to wellness. This is what we have to do because we are strong on the economy, on job creation, on being responsible with taxpayers' fund, for making sure we stand up for the men and women in uniform and to have a strong Canada on the world stage as we have been since Vimy Ridge. But to do that, we also have to address all the issues that Canadians want us to tackle. And that's my commitment. If we have that courage to change and meet those challenges, we can make sure that Canada lives up to that great potential that John A. Macdonald thought it had when he founded Canada. He said, John, this is a quote from John A. Macdonald, which Justin Trudeau takes down the statues. I think we've got a lot to learn from our history, the bad and the good. He said, Canada is a great country. It will be the greatest in the universe, provided we stay united. It will shrink into obscurity if we become divided. Never more true today, when we have a Wexit movement, a Maverick movement, the Bloc Québécois, which, as you remember, John, wasn't even an official party when we were in the majority Harper government. They're now the third party. They have more seats than Jagmeet Singh. And we have 2 or 3 various separation movements growing in the West that didn't exist 5 years ago, when we had a balanced budget, a united country, and a sense of optimism. That's what we need to restore: Canadian optimism, ingenuity, Canadian leadership. So thank you for that theme tonight, John.
Well, thank you. We do want you to be back in person. I think before that happens, there's going to be a 2 more, at least, Things That Matter episodes. Our colleague Ed Fast, who was instrumental in negotiating the Trans-Pacific Partnership and other free trade agreements, he'll be our guest on Things That Matter May 13th at 7 o'clock, along with Ernest Lang and Ian Meller, who are 2 local luminaries on things financial. And then we come to the other issue that you raised, Erin, June 3rd. You mentioned reconciliation. We'll be looking at reconciliation, getting ultimately beyond race-based rights, and celebrating excellence with Ellis Ross, who's the Indigenous MLA, Joanna Barron, who is the Executive Director of Canadian Constitution Foundation, which I had the honor to found back in 2003, and Mark Milkey, the author. So those are 2 upcoming episodes. Vivian started us off by trying to invoke the team. She said, get out the word, volunteer, and donate. I would be very grateful if you took her words to heart, just as I'm very grateful to you and the audience for being here tonight. And let me say one more time, Erin, it's late for you in Ontario. You're with us. You've got our backs. You're our friend and our leader, and we really appreciate your being with us tonight. Thank you. Merci bien.
Merci, John. The Things That Matter, send John to Ottawa. Thank you, everyone. Be well.